So I'm Joerg Reinhold. I'm a physics professor at Florida International University. When Leanne asked me to come here and asked, okay, what am I supposed to do? I have 60 minutes. She said, okay, present your presentation, but have also a little bit of an activity in there. And actually, I have to admit, when I'm going to one of these active learning talks, I always hate the activity, so it's payback time. and then leave some ample time for questions and so on. So I'm trying to maybe do this 20 minutes, half an hour presentation, have you think about this for a few minutes, and then also leave time for questions. What is it about? I'm not a physics education research guy. I'm just an ordinary run-of-the-mill nuclear physicist, an experimental nuclear physicist. I did not do anything controlled studies or so. The only thing what happened is I was shocked, and I'll show you this in a second. I was shocked about the huge failure rates when I started teaching a class again that I hadn't taught for a while. I read some books about teaching. I had a colleague, the office next to mine, who was a PR guy. And we talked a lot, and I read something, I implemented that, and I liked what I got out of it. Please come in. Just getting started, so. So what had happened is that my then chair asked me, Joerg, I want you to try a 300-student physics without calculus intro class. I asked him, why me? He said, because you have a hot pepper on ratemyprofessor.com. That's actually true. That was a hallway. That was a hallway conversation. Yeah? So it started from then. The hot pepper is gone by now. Was huge auditorium style. Yeah? Mainly pre-med students. So the biology majors that all want to go to medical school. So mainly students that want to pass the class with an A because that's what they need. And I taught this in the spring semester, and here I'll show you somewhat more data. So all the way to the left was the first semester I taught that class. And I had a 60% failure rate in that class. I looked at this very carefully, and I did all these things like repeat some problems on the final that they had on the midterm. They still couldn't do it and so on. I couldn't get myself to do any curving on that. So I actually failed close to 60% in that semester. Interestingly, in the fall, it was down to order of magnitude 30%. This is what I was used to when I taught this type of class before. I never worried if I'm failing. If I was failing 30%, I thought, that's okay. Yeah. So for years, I had roughly 30% failure rates, 20 to 30% of those classes. Next spring again, close to 60%. And you see there's sort of this oscillation going on between fall and spring semester. And I have a hypothesis. That is, spring is physics 1. That's the students that take it out of sequence. So there's a lot of repeat offenders in there that take the class for the second or for the third time without any change in the approach that they're bringing in there. And so by fall 2012, I started thinking, okay, I need to do something about this. And I started then sort of, let's call this elements of active learning. So I brought LAs into the classroom, learning assistants. I started using clickers. And with the LAs, we had the students solve problems in the classroom, but I just showed you it's a big auditorium, very difficult to do because you don't get to the students. Yeah. So I continued this. Maybe even in fall 12 I did some harm to it because the failure rate went up there, but you don't know this really because I had only one data point beforehand for a fall semester. So I continued doing this. Maybe if you want, you can see some modest improvement in the spring class, but not a lot, or not really a lot. Then our Center for the Art of Teaching, they always put on these faculty work groups. I never had time to actually commit to the meeting time, but I started buying the books anyhow and reading them, at least one book a summer. And the one that actually sort of triggered what I was doing, it's not described in there, but triggered what I was doing was cheating lessons. And it's actually not about cheating. It's about what to do, the right things to do that will get automatically cheating down. And I took away a few things from reading this book. High stakes testing leads to cheating. You know, sort of this 2 midterm exams and a final. You have a bad day on the midterm exam, or you don't really know what you're up against yet for a midterm exam, and your grade is gone. You never recover from that. And then a final which costs you 40% or 50%, you have a bad day during the final, your grade is gone. I also learned about this, reading in this book, about the testing effect. And essentially what that says is that testing leads to learning because you have to recall stuff. Yeah? So this is, if you're interested about this, the names are Karpige and Rödinger. So I started thinking about this, and I had a friend sitting in the office next to me, David Brooks, he's a physics education researcher, and he could always tell when I was walking down the hallway, the way I was smurfing. He knew when I would turn around, stick my head into his office, come up with another crazy idea. And so I came up with the idea of getting rid of the midterm exams and testing my students much more frequently. And we had conversations going on for about a semester, and then I thought, okay, let's do that. Yeah? We worked together. I will show you my grading rubric. We worked together on that. We implemented that in spring 2015 for the first time, and we went through several iterations. I moved eventually to a flat classroom, active learning classroom, half the size, which was also much better. So what did I do? I drastically changed the way I was assessing my students and determining their grades. I was doing already active learning in the classroom, sort of elements of active learning, LAs, clicker questions, and so on. But what I then did is I replaced midterms by weekly tests. This was a 4-credit-hour class, meets for 100 minutes, twice a week for 100 minutes. I always set apart the second 50 minutes of the Thursday class for a test. So every single week the students get a 50-minute test, but it's only one problem. So not a test with half a dozen problems or so that they have to speed solve. There's only one problem on the test. The test gets graded pass, fail. No averaging going on. Yeah? And then so this is essentially from the syllabus how they're getting assessed. I say there are 4 categories. There are these tests, weekly tests. There's participation in the classroom, clickers and so on. There's homework, and there's a final. If you want to pass the class, you got to pass in all 4 categories. Not a lot, so no averaging. I don't average 100% of homework into somewhat so-so performance on the tests. I say no, if you want to pass this class, you have to pass on the test alone, but you also have to pass the homework and the participation. If you don't do that, you're going to fail the class. Then what I did is, I selected, it's an intro physics class, I selected, this is essentially the 5 major themes throughout the semester. Motions, any physicists around here? 1 physicist, 2, 3, yeah? Motion, Newton's law, work and energy, momentum, and periodic motion. And I start the students off with a simple problem. I will show you examples of that. Just a simple problem where I say, okay, this is the minimum I want you to be able to learn in this course, and you have to pass that test. So you cannot, you have to pass this test. And in order to pass the class, you have to pass this on a C level, a simple problem, in all 5 topics. You're missing one topic, you fail the class. If you want to get a better grade, you have to be able to solve more difficult, more complex problems. Eventually also problems that combine the concepts, 2 concepts with each other. And depending on how you do that, also you can then earn a B on A. So essentially, in order to get an A in the class, you have to pass 9 tests, but there are 14 weeks in the semester, so you're getting 14 tests. So you can fail. Yeah? So you have to pass a test. Just getting 40% on one and 100% on the other one doesn't give you 70% and passes you. You have to pass each individual test, but you have ample of opportunity to make up and learn from your mistakes and get better at it. So essentially, if you're only aiming for a C, yeah, you got to get 5 out of 14. Yeah, and there are students that need that much time to get through that. Yeah. Essentially, what turned out, and I expected this to happen, this is not an issue for any of the students. This is where the music is. That's where they're struggling with. I never ever failed a student or downgraded their grade because they couldn't do this. It's this what they were working on.
The final exam one shot.
The final exam is a one shot. I'll give them a multiple choice test, and don't spread the word. Most of the time, I haven't even looked at it. Yeah. So it's here. That's what I'm emphasizing. That's what I'm emphasizing is these tests here. Now, what I realized is now I was before working in sort of trying to do active learning in the classroom. I've never learned this properly, how to do this, so I call it elements of active learning. What I realized is testing them once a week is active learning. Because no matter what they do, when you do activities with them, there's always a table in the corner that you don't get to, or when you get to that, they haven't worked anything, they don't participate properly. Doing this 50 minutes of the week, every student is sitting there and working on a problem. Yeah? And first week, sometimes it's the first time they really work on the problem because they don't do it properly at home or when they're studying with their friends. So these are 50 minutes where everyone in the classroom is active, and I didn't get any empty paper back anymore. Everybody does something.
And you're saying 50 minutes for one problem?
For one problem. And I show you right now how simple they are. But the interesting thing is, the thing is what I had realized is in the old days, in a 100-minute exam or so, I was giving them two big problems and then a number of multiple choice problems. I was doing something like that. Or 2 or 3 problems and then multiple choice problems. And what I had noticed also is that a large fraction of students, there were 2 or 3 problems which are just empty. Yeah? Virgin paper, nothing on there. Yeah? This, for example, is something that I'm giving them in their second week of class. Yeah? First test. This is just motion. It is, let me read this because you probably can read it. In a sprint competition, FAU track and field athlete Maya Balfour, out of the starting blocks, accelerates to a top speed over a distance of 8.6 meters in 1.58 seconds. Assuming that the acceleration is constant, find the acceleration. This is an extremely simple problem. It's one equation. They have the equations. They don't have to memorize them. It's one equation. Pick the equation, solve it for the acceleration. You've got to pick the right equation. It's an extremely simple problem. If you're a physics major, you solve this in 2 minutes. Yeah? Now, what I'm requiring them to do is, and in the beginning, I'm walking them through the steps. Yeah? What I want them to do is also, they are supposed to do a graphical representation of this. Yeah, so here I'm giving them a coordinate system already with acceleration versus time, speed, velocity versus time, and also position versus time, which you can see there. Yeah. They have to really write down the equations. I asked them actually in the beginning to write all equations down. And then identify what do they know in these equations. Yeah? So what are the unknowns? Teach them how to pick the right equations. Explain them. Explain for each of the equations why it can be used, why it cannot be used. Yeah? Find the acceleration. And then eventually evaluate the answer. Does the answer make sense? Yeah? Now, this is an extremely simple problem. There are students that need 50 minutes for that. Yeah? Because what we're dealing with is we're dealing with students, especially in those classes, they never ever had physics in their entire life, and they're struggling with the math to begin with. Yeah? They have math issues too. So they really, some students need, there's no student handling this in 10 minutes. Yeah? So need half an hour to 50 minutes is what those students need for that. This is what I consider, this is a very simple problem. This is what I consider the problem that they need to solve something of this type to get a C. This is to get them started and warmed up, get them ready for the rubric and so on that I'm using. And sometimes up to 50% fail their test on the first try. Because they're not necessarily getting graded on the right answer, but we're getting there. This is what I do then, for example, for a more complicated problem. And that's a problem where you and your friend compete in a sprint against each other. Your friend is an accomplished track athlete. She gives you a 6-meter head start. So you're not starting at the same location. You both accelerate from rest at different accelerations. After what distance will your friend catch up with you? This is now more complex because you have two objects moving relative to each other. Yeah? Again, I want them to draw the graphs for both the friend and yourself. Note at this point, I'm not walking them through here anymore. I'm not explaining them exactly anymore what to do. They're not supposed to know that how to set it up and that they have to evaluate it, check the units. That's at this point they're supposed to know that. Yeah? So I have problems of very simple problems and then more tricky and difficult problems that they need to solve if they want to get a better grade than a C. This you don't need to talk about. I will show you this blown up in a second. This is just a snapshot of the rubric, sort of 4 categories. One is a representation, a graphical representation of some form of the problem. The mathematical physics representation, explanation at each step. Their graphs have to be explained. Their mathematical steps have to be explained. In the end, they're supposed to carefully check the units and also then checking whether the answer makes actually sense. And so is it the right order of magnitude? Does it fit with my expectations? Does it have the right behavior if I change a variable? Something like that. Note, and this was one thing I was arguing with David Brooks for about a semester, is my idea was, because I'm giving them a test every week. And you're looking at the nightmare of grading. And I said, David, I think the only way I can do this is, if the answer isn't right, I don't even grade it. And David told me, don't do that. Because if you grade them on the answer, they will focus on the answer, not on the process. We were arguing about this for an entire semester. And eventually I said, you're the expert, I trust you, let's do it your way. And he was so right about this, and I'll show you examples for this. Yeah? So the correct answer is not part of the rubric. You can get 8 points and you have the wrong answer. Now, in order to get the 8 points, you have to evaluate it and better figure out that this doesn't make any sense. Even if you can't find the right answer anymore. You better figure out that what you did there doesn't make any sense. You can get the other 2 points for your evaluation, and you can get even an 8 points on that test. Yeah? And the passing threshold for passing is set 6 out of 8. What is it, 70%, 75%? Yeah? To pass the test. And this shows us a little bit, I think we're positive. Good. So they have to have a diagrammatic representation. That representation has to be consistent with their math. So the mathematical representation and graphical representation have to match each other. It has to be properly explained, your graphical representation and your math. And then, as I said earlier, they have to evaluate limiting cases, yeah, order of magnitude, physical reasonableness, and things like that to evaluate this.
You said your rubric went through a refinement process?
No, the one thing is, once we developed this, there was very little tweaking that I did in subsequent semesters.
Okay.
Now, we talked about this, we argued about this for an entire semester before we did it. But afterwards, I wrote then a sort of a half page or so for each rubric point to better explain students also, based on the previous observations, how to fulfill this rubric. But I didn't touch that rubric for several years.
Sorry, did you give examples of student work and how this would...
I will give you an example.
Did you give that to them, of what you're looking for?
Actually, no, I did not give them example of students' work beforehand, but we then solved problems together in the classroom before and talked about what they need to do for this step, and this step. So I gave them examples, but maybe it's great. I should have given maybe student examples as well, which I did not. And then the other thing that I did is then, in the beginning, when I did this the very first time, I had problems that were for the C-level problems, then I had B-level problems, and then I had A-level problems. And I was giving more than 14 tests, so that was a nightmare. It was unsustainable. So what I did is these more complex problems, whether you get an A or a B, I decided, okay, what I really wanted all of my students to learn, yeah, is to derive an answer as an expression, and then be able to look at that expression and analyze it. Yeah? For example, the answer for some simple problem in motion might be v squared over 2a. I don't want them in the first line to plug in the numbers and shuffle around with numbers and get some value in so many meters. I want them to be able to learn how to derive the expression, analyze the expression. For example, this is a braking path for a car, and realize that, yeah, the braking path is directly proportional to the velocity squared. Yeah? And inverse to proportional. For example, if you have the A in the numerator instead of the denominator, you should realize this. The braking path goes up if I'm braking harder, acceleration harder. So look at these things and analyze this. And that is the distinction between an A and a B. Yeah? So the one big thing that I did is I stepped back from giving them sort of what I did earlier, more complex problems, 2 or 3 of them on a test, 4 on the final, I think is what I did. And then just giving partial credit, at which point a student with some 100% on homework and averaging and so on might actually never ever in the entire semester have solved the problem correctly. You know, they go 5-6 points on each problem, 100% on the homework and participation, and suddenly you get your C, but you never ever have solved the problem correctly. So I stepped back from that and said, okay, what is the minimum requirement that I want you to understand, that I say, okay, you have learned enough in this class, but you have to perform on a high level at this stage, that I can pass you. What is it you need to be able to do so that you can earn yourself a better grade, a B? And what is it? What distinguishes an A from a B? And I said an A from a B is a student who can do that. Yeah? A student who can solve a complex problem, get the numerical answer right and so on, gets a B. If you can derive an expression and analyze that expression, discuss it, sometimes it might be simple, sometimes it might be more complex. This is when I give you an A on that. Yeah? And that's something that most of students, the physicists probably know that, struggle with doing something like that, especially the non-physics majors. So let me give you an example of this. This is a problem. What students need to do is they're given, you're standing in a scale inside an elevator. The scale reads 10% more than your weight. What is the acceleration of the elevator? So you're inside an elevator, and if it is accelerating, the scale won't read your weight, will read something different. Yeah, didn't know that yet, huh?
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
never step on a scale
Yeah.
in an elevator.
So the students, this is a good example.
Depending on which way the elevator is going, you might want to.
Yeah. So the student first draws a diagram. I'm asking them to do this for an elevator at rest and an elevator which is accelerating. And what we're grading them on is that also in this diagram, the weight doesn't change because the weight does not change. Yeah? Your weight stays the same. What changes is the normal force from the scale on you. So we're grading them that this stays the same and that vector has to be drawn a little bit larger. Yeah? This is a basic problem right now. Setting it up and solving it is extremely simple. Yeah? In 2 lines or 3 lines, this is solved. This is not very. This is for the static case. Yeah? The student needs to describe, explain in writing why they've drawn it this way. Yeah? For example, if you're looking for things like, right, yeah, I drew the weight vector the same length because the weight doesn't change. The gravitational force doesn't change. And then the student works through setting up Newton's law and then gets to a final answer. Yeah? Calculates the final answer, and then for example, writes here, the answer seems reasonable because the normal force exerted on me is only 11% larger than my weight. I've been on roller coasters that exceed 2 or 3 vertical Gs, and riding an elevator does not feel like riding a roller coaster. Huh? So the student brings this now in connection. Now this is not everybody gets this to this level. Yeah, this is the typical answer. Yeah, and this is now a student that failed the test. Yeah, draws the weight longer suddenly. Yeah, actually, I think changes all the force. Now it keeps the other force the same. The student gets the right answer. This is the right answer for that problem. The student just fumbles around with G's and so on, but the explanations all don't make any sense. Yeah? So this is a student with the right answer that failed that test. And that happened a lot. And I suddenly realized, yeah, David was right. Yeah? Because that is the right answer, but there's now nothing in there that justifies that the student actually understood what they were doing in this case. Yeah? And on a more, there we go. This is a more complex problem now, where they have two concepts. They have to do forces and conservation of energy together, and that's a problem where they can get a B or an A on. Yeah? And then what they do is they derive first an intermediate result. The good students will carry this forward as an expression. They will derive a final answer, which only depends on the input, on the given parameters, but no values yet. And now comes a part. This takes about halfway into the semester that this evaluation pays off. That students suddenly start realizing, I'm getting the wrong sign. I should get a positive sign, I'm getting a negative sign. I made a mistake. In the old days, they just left as the answer was wrong. Now, this student, for example, makes a very simple mistake. It's in the rush of the moment, 2.8 divided by 2 turned into 1/4. It's a very simple mistake. Yeah? But the student actually looks at this and says, this is not correct because the age at point A has to be higher than at point B. So the student realizes the answer has to be larger than R. Yeah? Instead of going back there and finding it, the student unfortunately did the calculation again. Yeah? But the nice thing is the student realized I was making a mistake. This answer doesn't make any sense. I made a mistake. Yeah? So finds actually the right answer and then gets the right answer, evaluates it and so on, and then also describes that it makes sense. The height is directly proportional to R. This makes sense. If I make this second hump higher, I have to start higher up. If I get 1/R, something is wrong. And students should need to learn how to get this. So to finish this out here is what happened is I started this assessment in spring 15, 300 students in a large auditorium classroom. Was a logistic nightmare to handle all of this. And I gave them 3 different types of tests for C, B, and A. I stepped back on that, I think already here. Spring 16, I moved into an active learning classroom. Flat classroom, 6 students to a table, 174 students anymore. And sort of what you see kind of here, the spring semesters, suddenly, yeah, the spring semesters, here in the end, there's essentially no significant difference between the spring and the fall semester. The students perform at the same, roughly at the same level in both of the semesters. About 10% failure rate. A big chunk of those 10% is students that after the second week didn't show up anymore. So a lot of them are no-shows. Hardly any student in there that came for every test and failed us over and over again and couldn't get these 5 tests right. Yeah, by the end of the semester, every student passed, essentially that worked past their 5 tests. Okay, I think I want to, because otherwise we're running out of, before I'm eating too much time. I was asked to do a little activity. Okay, 5 minutes or so.
Can we do Q&A as an activity?
With one of your friends for 5 minutes. Think about one topic only in your class. One topic only in your class. I'm not sure what you guys are doing. I don't know you. Yeah. So, but if you're doing a sort of partial credit grading and so on, and an averaging thing, think about what would you define for this topic to be the minimum level that a student, the minimum activity or problem that a student has to solve for you to think on that, I can pass that student on that topic. And then maybe what would be a more advanced thing? So not saying 50% is passing rate, 5 points out of 10 or 6 points out of 10 is passing rate. No, what is it that they really absolutely need to be able to do, but on a more basic level than a complicated problem? For you to say, okay, on this topic, they have achieved enough so that they can pass them. I'll give you 5 minutes, and then we go question and answer. So anyone wants to report something back from the discussions?
That might be okay. Have you thought about, you were doing it for 2053 without calculus.
Yeah.
Which is fine, and everything was fine. Where instead of, so the traditional way is, as you've already pointed out, you can show complete incompetency in a small number of areas as long as you do really well in others. In this, in the traditional way. Whereas here, you've got to show some level of competency in all the areas.
Yeah.
But you can get through with barely knowing a little bit in every area, and you'll still get a C. What about in 2048, the one with calculus, which is for physics majors and engineers? We were just thinking, I guess one way to solve that, because in order to do well in the later courses, if you're a physics or engineering major, you probably need to know more than a rudimentary level in all the areas, or you'll just not get through.
You probably have to define it. You probably have to define it more appropriate
So
for what they do afterwards. You probably
solve that problem.
You have to move the bar up a little bit. Yeah. For example, what I've done is, for example, the difference between if you look at the textbooks without calculus, with calculus, there's hardly any difference. Yeah?
Right.
Most of the problems are the same and the topics are the same, but I always made sure, way back when I taught the with calculus classes also, you can get an A in the class if you can solve problems that actually use calculus.
Right.
Now, because most problems don't use calculus, but
right.
if you want to get an A in the class, you can get an A unless can give you some problems that we actually have to apply calculus to solve a problem. Yeah. Right. But you have probably you have to do this for an engineering major. You have to do this different. But we're talking here mostly biology majors. They never ever will take any other class that really builds up on that and does more complicated physics problems.
Yeah.
So for them, I felt comfortable. So see, the thing is, what I did is I said, I call this ridiculously easy to pass and frustratingly difficult. Because to get the C, the problems are very simple to get a C. But students are struggling with this throughout the entire semester to get this done. So they fail the test again, and they fail the test again, and they fail the test again until they actually. So by the time they're getting their C, they don't only have worked on 5 problems. They have worked on 14 problems, and they might have gotten more than 5 of them right, but their explanations were still wrong and so on. Yeah, so they do more than just 5 problems. They do 14 problems in a semester, but just on a very basic level. And they're always slightly different, what they're getting.
So to adapt this for the physics with calculus
Yep.
sequence, it seems to me you could use the same approach.
You could use the same approach,
raise
yeah.
The bar
Yeah.
for what is a C.
Yeah, yeah.
So that it could
Define the skills. And probably what we should be doing, which we never really do, is we probably should sit down with an engineering faculty and say okay, actually, even in that class, I had people. Then there were construction management. Next class I need to take is structures. I never found the time. I wanted to talk to the faculty teachers. Okay, sit down, give me a book and see, okay, what are really the things that your students need to learn to be successful in the class? And the one thing that I had to develop for this class is, because students can retake, by week 3, 4, everybody's taking different tests. Someone might take their first motion for an A. Other students take forces for a C. And by the end of the semester, there's a table with 6 students, and each student is working on a different topic. Now, this is all done by software. So I could actually go ahead and even have different populations in the classroom where I say, okay, construction management, I'm getting them more tougher on the forces because that's what they need. They don't necessarily, they might not need motion. So this could be adapted to different student populations, but we probably should be talking to our colleagues.
Just to let you know, at FIU, the physics department has talked with the engineering people for the 2048.
We're doing it now.
We've been doing it for several years.
Yeah,
talking to them.
we're doing it now. Yeah. I think there were some questions.
So I did something very similar when I taught high school. And even with the retaking of the tests, I found that it cut down on my grading load a lot because it was the first pass of grading took significantly less time because it was very obvious that they didn't hit the C level.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, you got to take this again. Right, come back in a week and work on it. We can work together, all that. So I actually found that I have more time to spend on other things. So where did you find your biggest time sink?
The one thing is a bit big. You are right, and I have actually a slide here in the back end of this. The grading is not that much more intensive because in the old days, if I give them more problems on a test, so I'm giving them slightly more problems. But now the way we're grading, you don't have to fish for partial credit points in their awful math and so on. I just check, is it set up properly? Then I see in the end, is the answer right? I'm not grading them on that, but do they recognize whether it's right or wrong? And in between, I don't try to figure out where they made the mistake. So this goes once you get the hang of it, it goes much quicker. The challenge is, I always did it with graders, with graduate students. The challenge is to get the graduate students up to speed that they can grade different problems. The next paper they're looking up is a different problem. So it's not that they can't do 174 times the same problem. They're all different in this week. Some of the things which go up as a time sink is office traffic. Instead of coming twice a semester to you and whining about points and so on, this goes up because they got a 5 on a test and they want to know whether they can get a 6 on a test to pass it. So things like that go up. It is not, if you have the logistics worked out, it is not that much more grading intensive. That's correct. I think.
So, I mean, I'm not a physicist, but how do they get the right answer if they don't, I mean, how do they arrive at the right answer? And yet they fail. I mean, how do they get there?
Oh, because one thing is you can get to I call this the clutch effect, because across the street from FIU there's clutch tutoring, and they have very specific tutoring for every faculty. So if they're with Reinhold, they're having all my old tests, and they are just training them on answering the right techniques to answer the right questions without understanding what they're doing.
This because
Yep.
they don't understand, but
Yep.
I was just curious
They
to know
don't
how
understand. Yeah, no, you can get
There's also something called algebraic miracle.
Yeah.
Because you turn negative sign here and you
exactly
turn a negative sign
twice
there.
twice a sign mistake and so on. You get the right answer, and you fumble around a little bit with it.
Company, Sean? Oh, tell her about this clutch company, literally across
Oh,
the street.
that's
Yeah.
good.
It's a company, a private
company, yeah.
company that's set up, rents out space in that shopping center across the street.
Uh-huh.
And they do a really good job of tailoring their tutoring to
Teaching to
whichever
the test,
instructor you have.
Teaching to the
So
test.
you
Yeah.
pay them the money, and they have test banks for every instructor at FIU.
So this it's
I no, I didn't.
it is surprisingly often that students get the right answer, and we fail them.
Yeah, I was
Because-
just curious
yeah.
to see how they
Yeah.
how
And that works either by setting up the sometimes they set it up right, sometimes they fumble around with things, and they're taught schemes, but they don't understand what they're doing.
Just the
They cannot explain in writing. They cannot explain in writing what they're doing.
Yeah.
It cuts also a little bit back on the cheating. They have different problems anyhow on the table, but also it's much more difficult just copying an equation from your neighbor than actually a half page of explanations that you have to write to get the 2 points that you need for the explanation to pass the test.
So does the clutch company offer refunds?
I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're doing.
So, how many pairs of trained grading eyes do you need, the minimum, to be able to consistently grade those tests with a satisfactory level of consistency?
You're talking about a completely different target. Grading consistency is, I think, for everybody, is a big issue. Yeah, and this doesn't make that easier necessarily, because the one thing is if you have for several semesters the same graders, it's getting better and better. But if I had in the end when I was doing this, I was lucky. I got a 6th graders helping me. Yeah, so we were meeting eventually with 6th graders. I was able also to meet in one room for an hour or 2 a week to do the grading together, where we can exchange also what we're doing. So not that the graduate students walk off for a week and a week later bring it back to you and did this at night somewhere. So but even then, even if you have the grader sitting right in there with you, there's things where you catch up on things that they did not do properly. So the problem is the larger the number of graders gets, the bigger the problem of consistency gets. Yeah, I don't have the best of worlds. I would grade all of them, but you don't have necessarily the time to do that. Yeah.
So a follow-up question: have you ever thought of creating multiple choice questions that are approximations of what you are testing students, the skills that you're testing students? So for example, having them, instead of having them coming up with explanations or coming up with sense making, ask them to distinguish between good sense making cases and bad sense making cases.
I have not done that.
And see
I have not
if,
done that.
to what extent can you approciate that?
Approximate that, yeah.
Physicists are all
Yeah.
about approximations. Right?
Yeah. You see, I do like I'm just reluctant or hesitant to go to all multiple choice.
Oh, no.
Tests,
I'm not saying
yeah.
all multiple choice,
Yeah.
but you know,
I do what I do with this in class.
Right.
Yeah, with clickers. We do clicker questions where they have to reason about certain things. Yeah, I'm giving them clicker questions with force diagrams, the right ones and the wrong ones with common mistakes and so on, and they have to discuss it and figure out which one is the right one. I do those things. I did not do this with the explanations.
Right.
So I did do it on the graphical or mathematical representation, but I have never done that with explanation. I should also say that I stopped teaching this class last time, spring 17. So I gave that class up.
Yeah, because I'm not only thinking about assessing,
Yeah.
it's also a learning process.
Yeah.
Right? If we can automate that, we can give them immediate feedback on not just the right answers, but also on sense making on that, so that
Yeah.
we can assess them less frequently. We can use these high grading intensive assessments less frequently,
Yeah.
but give them more frequent
Yeah.
practice.
It would make sense. The one thing is they're getting fairly similar problems on their homework. Yeah, I was using Blackboard for that, but they only get graded on the right answer.
There we go.
Yeah, so there's a disconnect.
That's the
There's a
value.
disconnect from the homework stage. But on the other hand, I always had learning assistants, and each of my learning assistants had to meet for 1 hour with whoever wanted to show up.
Right.
And so I had about 8 to 9 hours across the week where students could come in, and those learning assistants were, for the most part, students that had passed my class before with a good grade. So they knew when they were working with the students on homework that how to teach the students how to do what they need to do on the test and not just get the right answer. You reach a fraction of the class with these voluntary sessions. So where they do something similar also between tests.
Right.
So the students that aren't able to pass one section, meanwhile your lecture is continuing on.
Yes.
and on.
Yeah.
Okay. And
It's continuing on. Yeah.
They're stuck in this loop.
They're going back. Now the one thing is they might the moment, for example, we just have started with work and energy, yeah, and they're getting a simple problem about conservation of energy, and at that point everybody
Is back.
typically starts on that one, even if they have another one backed up still.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, he doesn't have class yet.
The question which I have is that you said that you don't count the final exam, right?
Final exam counts, but what you see is the threshold is set fairly low.
No.
Yeah, it's not because what I didn't want to do is, have these weekly tests, which are now at this point, at least initially, they're low stakes. They can get very high stakes in the end. Yeah, but initially it's all very low stakes. So I didn't want to do that, and then suddenly have a final exam that is high stakes. So I set the threshold for the final exam.
What I was trying to say is that you said that you don't even.
Sometimes because you were, if I got really busy, I just scanned. So I sampled a number of tests and so on. I said, yeah, this is okay, and I didn't really look at it very carefully.
So
I set a very low threshold on the final exam. So kind of that if you show up, yeah, you get a few conceptual problems and so on that you have to answer, but it's not a high stakes test. Sometimes what I did is also, instead of a final, what I did is this sometimes ends up in a mode where I'm giving a test and I have students for whom I don't have anything new yet. Yeah, so they get essentially they bank one try. Yeah, and in the end of the semester, if they really need it, they can take it. So sometimes I had semesters where actually I didn't give a final. Had students they could retake a test that they still needed to pass the class or to get their A. Yeah. So there were semesters I gave a final. There were semesters where I actually, on the day of the final, they were still taking one of those tests.
I was just wondering whether you found any correlation between the final exam score and the 14 test score to see if your.
Yeah. No, I did not analyze that. Yeah.
It might be a good idea
Yeah.
because tell you whether that final exam is a good exam or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The difference is also the final I did multiple choice. Yeah. Now these were based on problems we did in the classroom too on the board, but these were not based on tests that they have been taking. And if you look in the literature, if you do all show me the work problems during the semester, you give them multiple choice on the final. Don't expect that this works out very well. The other way around, neither. Yeah, so if you change
depends on how you set up your multiple choice.
Yeah.
I've been giving mixed. In all my final exams are half multiple choice, half previous.
I have been doing this previously too. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I do find a correlation between the multiple choice exam question answers scores and the regular test scores.
Yeah.
It's all about whether you are taking the multiple choice question for a rigor or validity and liability and this kind of thing.
Good question.
Sure,
So a lot more beneficiaries in the reform course, a higher percentage, but the victims, are there students who they are passing for the competency tests, yet they're failing the course, and they have to start again from the beginning? Are we having that segment of students?
So that
They're almost passing the course.
They're almost
They don't
passing
pass
the
it
course.
because it's a 16-week solution to
Yeah.
start all
No,
over again,
this-
rather than continue on for maybe a couple more
Yeah,
months.
no, yeah. So I say 5, you gotta pass. Yeah, and you're missing this one test. Yeah, this hardly ever happens. Now, it has happened, and I see this is a student who was there all the time, came to my office and so on. They're taking the test again. I don't write this in the syllabus, but yeah, they're missing this one test, and they have been working hard on it. Yeah, and they just need one more try. Then they're taking this one try. Yeah, this I have not failed a student. These are typically the students that are failing there. They have substandard works throughout the semester. They're missing a lot. They don't do their homework. Now, one thing, for example, I didn't go into the details of this. Yeah, one thing which is in the syllabus of that is they're getting weekly homework, and homework is open until the end of the semester. I don't care when you finish it, but you have to have scored 60% the night before. If you haven't scored 60%, you're not getting a test.
The homework is online or?
Online, yeah, homework is online. So it's not, we just discussed, it's not the same, they're getting graded differently. Yeah, no, homework is online, but they have to have passed 60%. So I'm monitoring homework throughout the semester, putting students on alert that when they don't do this. And then you have students that, for example, they 3 times during the semester I didn't give them a test. They're getting a metacognitive activity, but they don't get a test because they didn't do homework. They don't come to class. So in these 10%, you have a fair number of students that after the second or third week of the semester, you inform their advisor, you ask them to come to your office for help and so on, and you never hear back from them, and so on. These are in that failing range. Students that just are one problem away from passing the class, I typically found a way to make that happen.
We're at the end of time,
Yeah.
so maybe we kind of formally close, but then if Joerg is willing to stay a little bit longer. He mentioned also he has a picture of specs grading. It's the closest in the literature that describes a process similar to Joerg, so if you're interested, it's a really small book, and I would recommend it. But Joerg, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here.